There is a place where parched lips kiss warped reeds and cramped fingers stroke strings and keys, filling the air with melodies, and resurrected rhapsodies capture the cadence of ancient chants, where shackles are removed and our ancestors dance in anticipation of liberty, and every note that's played is dedicated to their memory.
Art enriches our society in so many ways.
I think when you look at helping to establish Kansas City as a world-class destination, one of the things that people look at is how progressive is the art community in the city.
Art is not going to, it's not going to do something on any sort of statistical level that's going to cure cancer. What art does is so intrinsic and so important, it's impossible to document.
But I think what people sometimes forget is the whole arts ecology. And you've got the large arts organizations and buildings, but at the base, Kansas City is very lucky to have an amazing community of individual artists.
I think artists within the community help to build it and bolster it in a way that other professions don't.
But what we haven't done is fund the individual artists as much as needed. So what Charlotte Street's trying to do is bring attention to this incredible vibrancy kind of at the bottom of the ecosystem.
We operate currently 3 spaces in which we're presenting in an ongoing way exhibitions, live performances, public programs, video screenings, artist talks. Really, these spaces are creating a platform for artists to do what they want to do.
The Charlotte Street, in a sense, it kind of helps us come together as a community, you know, to create and show each other kind of what we're doing, and it keeps the community, I think, motivated in a sense.
I was able to have a really nice big space to build stuff like this, and in a big room with a whole bunch of other artists, and so there becomes a conversation with other artists, and you know, kind of checking out each other's work and talking about ideas.
My work is getting out around the country through in many ways through Charlotte Street. Receive a grant like that, you go, there's a month that I don't have to, you know, scramble quite as hard.
National arts organizations around the country look to Charlotte Street as a model. Like, how are you doing what you're doing, and what makes it so good?
The thing that the Charlotte Street Fund has done is it's allowed people to breathe, it's allowed people to generate new work and have that kind of buffer that allows them to be in studio or be on stage or practice longer.
Charlotte Street, I think, reflects a state of mind in Kansas City. It's moving fast, it's keeping up with the creative life of Kansas City artists. It's supporting unusual projects, it's moving to the future, it's defining new ways to create programs and create dialogue.
It's just imperative. It's the most important thing is it gives artists time, and that's all we want.
I think it's about the validation, the recognition, to them, and having them realize that somebody cares.
We know that, you know, the community is increasingly sort of elevated and enriched the more voices and the more artists are here participating.
Charlotte Street, by being a clearinghouse of sorts, I think is really helping to move the city in that direction and giving artists an opportunity to be who they truly are.
So please welcome the eminence grise himself, David Hughes.
Thank you.
And I also want to thank Bob Rainier and the Rainier Family Foundation. This is a part of a series that they have funded that is called Kansas City Cradle of Entrepreneurs, and we started out interviewing commercial entrepreneurs, people like John McDonald of Boulevard Brewing, Gail Lozoff of Spin Pizza, Ollie Gates. You may notice there's a food theme there. We found that if we actually served the product, we had a bigger audience, particularly with John McDonald. But we decided that we wanted to do a series, and Bob jumped on it, Bob Rainier, with social entrepreneurs. We've had Sue Ellen Freed with her Reaching Out from Within and her anti-bullying efforts and the various other things that she's done over the years. Adam Hamilton of the Church of the Resurrection, who I mentioned before, who'll be back with the Lyric program. And that's turned out to be a phenomenally interesting one, because one of the great things about Kansas City is we have not only great business and commercial entrepreneurs, we have perhaps increasingly a really lively social entrepreneurial set, and David is one of the greatest examples of that. And so, David, I want to start out by asking you, as I saw the pictures, and I've gone through the pictures of your 10th anniversary. We're on the 20th anniversary now, booked at 10. And let's see. I want to ask you about this guy, how Charlotte Street started. The name of Charlotte Street is actually because of this guy, John Puchek.
Exactly.
And why was John Puchek so important?
Greetings all. Puchek was a major influence on my life. There were many influences over the years with regard to art and artists, but Puchek was one. Katie and Court Sinnes, if any of you remember or know them, moved to town from the Bay Area. Court was a writer, a cook, amazing entertainer, an art collector. Katie was a very powerful banking consultant. And they moved to town and blew the city apart a bit in terms of dinner parties and art and fun. I met Puchek, this character, at their house. And Puchek lived at 5409, something like that, Charlotte. It was Midtown.
That's an interior view of 5409 Charlotte.
Not for vegetarians.
He was a great barbecuer.
I had my first salad at his house, I think, many years later when he married Margaret, and she was a big gardener, but he didn't serve salads until then. It was meat.
Puchek, that's Chuck Haddocks, by the way, for those of you who are interested in Saturday night fish fries.
And the Saturday night fish fry was named for Puchek. This was a block of artists that many of you, or some of you knew perhaps better than I do. And this is a cast of characters one day. You can try to identify some of them. But it was a house that he rented from UMKC. And it was just a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week. He was feeding people. He was feeding them with food. He was feeding them spiritually. There were lots of artists, musicians, dancers, hangers-on like me, wayward bankers, and library people.
There's an underlying theme here, too, by the way. There was a part in his career, it's rarely talked about, when David was a banker. And of course, I'm also a recycled banker, so we're into recycled bankers. Of course, the president of the library board is here tonight, who has yet to recycle himself. We got to have somebody in the family who's still paying the bills, you know. So there is a little bit of a theme here, but I can remember Puchek too. I go back a little bit further than David. He's much younger, better dressed, and better looking, but. I can remember the days when Kansas City was such an art center. Did you ever know an artist named Bill Harding?
No.
I think Puchek introduced me to him. Bill Harding was a grass artist, and no, we're not going to smoke anything tonight.
Puchek was good at that, though, too.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. Drugs played a role in this. There are no children here, are there? Bill Harding actually covered things in grass. He covered a car in grass. It became kind of famous, and it became so famous that he went on the Johnny Carson show, and gave Johnny Carson a tie that was made out of grass. And while he did that, I'm looking at this picture thinking my first wife must be in this picture. His car covered with grass was in our parking lot. So Kansas City has always been pretty much a center for the weird and wonderful.
Yeah, I think it's been all underground or under the radar of many civic types and corporate types. And the Art Institute, how old is that? 130, 35 years. The conservatory. I mean, it's an amazing, rich tapestry that's there that is not that well known.
And there was when we want to get into why you started Charlotte Street and when you came back from your Wanderjahr off to the East Coast and West Coast and whatnot. But there was Peter von Sigesar, is that, am I correct?
Vonsegazer, right.
Vonsegazer, in the 10th anniversary book, he has a great phrase about the folks who lived in Kansas City, who were interested in the arts, were mostly driving. They were a cultural iconoclasts who were driving old cars and buying old vinyl of 20s jazz figures and whatnot. And there was this odd group of people in Kansas City, I think, throughout our contemporary and near contemporary history. And how did you find that? I mean, where it's Puchek, obviously, but you and I grew up, and your father was the president of Hallmark, and
we had a Leave It to Beaver kind of growing up, and I was aware of certainly the large arts organizations growing up, and then was away and came back, and I didn't want to fall back with old people that I'd gone to country day school with, and I mean some of them, but a lot of them I really was not interested in, and I was searching, I think. I got at Dory Gates, if any of you remember her name, was a wonderful elderly lady by the time I really knew her, who'd started a gallery around Luce Park, and she turned her garage into a gallery.
Garage was the gallery. I can remember going with my father to buy things from Dory, look at things.
And I loved Dory. I mean, I don't know why, and she had an amazing eye, I thought. Me, who was, I'm not an artist, I'm not a curator, I'm not trained, but I loved the work, and it was local and regional artists, and it was, and national ones that she had come and showed. So that was fun. Katie and Court, met Puchek. I met John O'Brien through Puchek, I think, sometime soon thereafter, who had the Dolphin Gallery. And it was just a combination of people and circumstances, art and parties and food.
And party. Food, of course, plays a big role. We can get back to that. The party part, I do want to get to this, because I want to ask you if the essence of Charlotte Street isn't actually the party, having parties. And I mean that semi-seriously, because
Sure.
I think part of what you've been really successful at, I mean, I think there's been a kind of underground, and Peter talks about this in the 10th anniversary book, underground art scene in Kansas City probably forever, to the extent that there is anywhere in a town our size.
I mean, back to the jazz age, right?
Yeah, going back to the jazz
who knows
age,
before
exactly.
that,
And music has always been a big part of it. But I think one of the things that Charlotte Street seems to me to have done is created a community for artists that didn't probably exist, at least above ground. It existed in Puchek's kitchen to some extent, but you've really created a community of artists, it seems to me. I mean, was that your goal in doing this?
Well, I don't think I've created anything. I mean, I think there are so many people, and the artists to begin with, but the arts professionals and the hangers-on and who've done all this. Charlotte Street, I think, has been a vehicle for a lot of people to participate and make some of this happen. But certainly the party aspect of it, I think like I say, Katie and Court were excellent partiers. And I learned a lot from them in terms of hosting a party. I lived in David Stickelberg's niece's old house on Locust Street, and there were French doors all around, tiny little house, and you could have great parties there where, I remember it was a group of dancers who left at 6 in the morning as the morning paper's arriving. And so personally, I enjoyed the confluence and the interaction of all kinds of people. I mean, the arts professionals, the artists, the dancers, the musicians, and lawyers and bankers, those lawyers and bankers who like that kind of stuff. And certainly as the gallery scene was starting, before First Fridays, it was a chance to drink, hang out, socialize, and with the art. Those were the openings. And I remember as we were starting up some of the galleries, and I was talking to Jim Brinsfield, who is a well-known artist in town, and I was trying to pair an artist with an architect to design a space. And he said, well, we're not going to do this unless there's free beer, right? And so I said, well, yes, this is important. And I spent, I think, half the time at Charlotte Street at regulated industries trying to get liquor permits once it became illegal to serve beer. And they tried to shut down some of the stuff in the crossroads very, very, very early.
So I want to come back to that aspect, the social aspects of what you've done, and the public space aspects, that not only the community of artists, but artists in the community, and what that community looks like today. But I do want to go back a little bit for a second and have you talk about you know, we grew up in a similar atmosphere. I'm older than you are, but you went away to school. And you went away to work for a while in a bank. Did you go away? I mean, I think this is a question you can ask of a lot of people of our generation, if we consider your age and my age a generation, who went away. And some people went away to get away, and some people went away to educate and enlighten themselves and come back. Why did you go away, and did you expect to come back?
I don't think I mean, I went away for college to the West Coast. I'd grown up spending time on the East Coast. My mother was from there, and we'd go back every summer, and I felt an affinity for the Northeast. And I applied to schools all up there, but I really rebelled against that. There was some talk about whether we should paint the outside shower at my grandmother's place orange and black for Princeton or white and blue for Yale. And I went to Stanford. I was just like, and college wasn't great for me. I mean, it wasn't bright college years as so many people fondly remember it.
But Kurt Varnado was at Stanford, right?
Yeah, and I had an art class from him that was amazing. But the overall Stanford experience for me, college just wasn't. Grad school was amazing, and so I was back east at a new program at Yale. I mean, I went away to get educated. Get out of the house, and I had no idea whether I would come back or not. I ended up in New York at a little bank on Wall Street doing grunt work, and that was not particularly interesting, but I met amazing people that I still, are still friends today. Not so much the art world. I wasn't into I mean, I went to New York City Ballet or went to galleries and things, but I was not plugged in at that point. And I think I really moved back. I mean, your question earlier about community, I didn't really get back to it, but community, and I don't know how important it was then, but it's just gotten more and more important to me over the years. And I think if there's one thing that's missing, it's a sense of community. And whether you're talking about nationally and what's going on politically, but just in a city and just in any way you can talk about it, we don't have enough community. And that means different things for different people. But I think it was something that brought me back here, thinking that I could make a difference more here than I could there. Even then, I was interested in not-for-profit and philanthropic stuff.
And so you come back and you're working for American Century, a large corporation, or did you work somewhere else before that? Because
I bounced around. It seems like people today in their 20s just bounce around, and settle down at some point. I didn't really. I had my first real job that I stuck with at the age of 35. So after grad school, I had 10 years of bouncing around. Somebody got an award at a 10-year graduate school reunion for having had the most number of jobs. And he went on the way to the podium. He said, "Well, I think David Hughes has had as many jobs as I've had." So I bounced around, but Hallmark, Hall Family Foundation. I tried to start a company with some friends. That was an abject failure. And then I ended up at American Century.
Right, and at American Century, you at least had something to do with the art world with their committee for buying art and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, this was a period when I was meeting all these people as I was looking for a job and trying to earn a living. And then when I got at American Century, I was doing client work, marketing around the country. But I was also on their philanthropic committee, and I joined the art committee. I don't know why they thought I could do that, but it was a lot of fun. And when I went on it, a conservative kind of a person who had a conservative taste in art, if you can define it that way, left the committee, and I came on, and it completely flipped what we were buying in terms of very contemporary work. The owner didn't like that so much, but he got over it.
So you're there in the corporate art world, and Kansas City's got this underground art thing, and Puchek and whatnot, and then there's sort of an establishment art world, the Nelson Fabulous Museum. Kemper comes along, the Art Institute is around. Hallmark employs a lot of artists,
Yeah,
which is
absolutely.
one reason we have a great artist scene is because there are places for artists to actually get enough money to feed the dog. And but what about all that inspired you to think up the idea for Charlotte Street?
Well, I had a good job at American Century. When I've been in organizations, the few I've been in, I don't like being in the bowels of an organization, or I didn't want to be at Hallmark in terms of product. I like to be on the edge of an organization where you're working with the inside of it, but you're dealing with outside people. So you're kind of on the edge. And I loved, American Century was great. They were good to me. I think I did a good job until I got kicked into middle management. And that's not a forte of mine, management. I don't know who can speak to here, but so as I got kicked into middle management, JP Morgan bought some of the company, and I just was feeling angsty. I actually I almost took a job at the Nelson at a time when they were thinking about more external affairs as they were thinking about raising money for the block building. So actually the Kaufman Foundation at the time, the Muriel McBrien Kaufman Foundation had no staff there. And I got to know Dave Lady when he was at the big Kaufman Foundation, and my idea was to go give out money from the Kaufman Foundation. Well, because I had not-for-profit friends were calling them and saying, can we get money? And nobody was returning calls. So I knew there was a kind of problem there. So my interest in my searching was there. At the same time, I was giving away money for the arts for American Century, small amounts, and as part of that effort, I gathered different artists and curators and other arts people to say, what do you need? What do you want? What can we do? And it was kind of revolutionary because we were talking to small arts organizations and not the biggies. So all that was going on, and I began to search personally and felt like there were some needs here, there were some opportunities, and that's when I decided to start Charlotte Street, just to get money, the first project that we had. It was later that I left to do it full time.
Well, it's an important moment because we're at the 20th anniversary, so we're talking about 1996, 1997. You're starting this. That's also most foundations have a hard time giving money to individuals. They want some institutional support for it, some institutional guidance for it. And the NEA, and the NEH, which had been giving out money to individual artists, unfortunately gave out some money to some very controversial artists right around that time.
Right.
And all of a sudden, that stopped. And
hugely really, controversial.
Yeah. And so you came along with the idea for Charlotte Street kind of at the right moment. And I think in Kansas City's history also at the right moment, because there was this burgeoning art scene. The Crossroads were starting to be a thing. You talk in the 10th anniversary book, there's talk about YJs and grinders, and all of a sudden there's this sort of grassroots thing growing.
I mean, there's a grassroots thing growing. The Nelson does the shuttlecocks. Grand Art starts. The Kemper. there's some activity going on, and I was meeting a lot of these people and having a good time at some parties, and I just
Parties just keep coming back.
These were friends, and I was thinking, well, how can we get some money to them? You know, how can we begin to support this a little bit? And I wasn't really aware. I mean, Creative Capital had not started, although that it was a project of the Warhol Foundation, kind of a national Charlotte Street, much bigger deal. But that was percolating too. I mean, I didn't realize it, but they started it after Charlotte Street. There was a guy in San Francisco who, several years after we started giving grants to artists in San Francisco, and now he's Arcadia. He's in 7 or 8 cities doing that. So it seemed to be percolating.
And so there is one version of the story that you have the idea for this. You write it down on a napkin, and
I don't remember that, but I've heard it told back to me. I remember being at Davies Stagecoach, illustrious, fine establishment, with John O'Brien, and I think that's where I sprang the idea on him to give money to artists. And I guess I don't know what I would need to write down on a napkin in that regard, unless we were communicating.
one of the original checks, maybe, you know, those
Well,
days you
no.
could, you know. But it's also true that you gave this $10,000 or whatever the original amount was, and divided it up into four pieces, and surprise, it was sort of like The Millionaire, the old TV show, The Millionaire. I don't think the artists didn't know they were going to get these checks. Is that right?
Well, we had not. So I'd been gathering. We gathered at the Old Classic Cup restaurant in the plot in Westport, and there was Deborah Scott, who was at the Nelson at the time, John O'Brien, Mark Spencer, who'd been a curator at Yellow Freight, and went on to the Albrecht Kemper, Craig Subler, who used to be at the UMKC Gallery. We had been convening for, I don't know, quite a while, every so often, to talk about the arts community and what's kind of needed or what people were thinking. And so I pulled this group back together again and said, well, what about if we can get some money? And so I got $10,000 from American Century, and we somehow got images, and we called them slides at the time. We got slides. We told no one, and they decided on the artists. We cut the checks from the Community Foundation, and they were mailed or delivered, and people didn't think they were real.
Part of the story is that you gave these checks to John O'Brien. Is John here in the audience by any chance?
He doesn't.
Yeah, I just think the idea of giving these checks to John and having him wander loose in the community.
We were putting them in mailboxes, and people didn't really think they were real. We had not told anybody, and we didn't announce it. Alice Thorson at the Star found out about it somehow, and she did a little something eventually. But and the Community Foundation, actually, when I went to them saying, "Can we do this?" they said no. It was kind of a minor, and I don't really remember what the process by which but we said, well, there's going to be a process, and they eventually said yes, but they may have done their own research.
And then there's a moment where, right about the time this happens, that or maybe a little bit later, where the UMKC Gallery has an exhibit that fails to appear, and so you're given the space, and it's the first Charlotte Street exhibit, first public presentation of Charlotte Street. So serendipity rears its head.
Serendipity always is an important part of anything that goes on, and luck. So we hadn't thought of it. I mean, we were all doing had our own jobs full time, and this was just on the side for everyone. But yeah, an opportunity presented itself, and so we had our first show.
And so that's the beginning of Charlotte Street as creating a community of space. I mean, there's a sort of Einstein time and space quality, the ratios of time and space quality. You give the money to the artists to give them time. We heard one of the artists say, there's a month where you don't have to worry about paying the bills. And so you give the artists time, but you also have, over the years, given them space. And in fact, Grant Burcham originally had this idea that we have these I mean, here are some spaces. But particularly downtown, Grant
Yeah.
was noticing there were lots of empty storefronts. And you took him up on that, and hence.
Yeah, we started something called Urban Culture Project. As I was bouncing around thinking about spending full time at this, I was talking to people about what kind of ideas might, what are the needs, what might be interesting. And Grant was talking about empty spaces. I don't know where he'd heard this, putting artists and giving artists empty spaces to do what they will with. And so we started this in the January of 2002 or 2003. The Brouses were there. I think we had one light sculpture on Petticoat Lane for one night. I don't know if we had any band or any music or any artists doing anything, but there was a lone light sculpture with on a freezing January night, and beer.
The theme.
And then
You understand
we
there's
had a
theme
window
here.
gallery across the street that the Kopakins had given us, that Nate Fors, it was Corey Strange was the artist, I think, who did the light sculpture, and Nate Fors was the curator artist for a window gallery across the street. And our idea was, I mean, the crossroads at that point, I lose track of time between about 1985 and now.
It gets worse, David.
It gets worse?
Yeah, it gets worse.
And so I can't place things, but the crossroads, I mean, what John says and remembers O'Brien from Dolphin was that after 9/11, everything cratered. And certainly things cratered at American Century, and I was spending 70% of my time planning Urban Culture Project. But the First Friday started going, and
The Crossroads were doing okay at that point, even though a lot of the business and civic league didn't understand that. The First Friday had started. I can remember having a conversation around that time with Tom McDonald. I'd had dinner at the place before Michael Smith took at the corner of 19th and Main with Betsy Brune, who's just
Zen.
retired as the director of the Smithsonian American Art Museum. And it was on Friday night, it was the First Friday, and we saw maybe 1,000 people go by 19th and the corner of 19th and Main. This is like 2001 or 2002.
Really?
And I remember having a conversation with Tom McDonald, then head of DST, and telling him about this. And he told me I was a liar. He said, that can't be true.
Yeah.
That cannot be true, that there were
Yeah.
1,000 people at 19th and Main on Friday night.
Yeah. So what we wanted to do was take some of that and I mean, these buildings in the Loop, that was what downtown was. 19th and Baltimore was not downtown, but within the Loop, and get free spaces or very cheap and give them to artists of all kinds and see what happens. I mean, there are some pictures here. I mean, this is a space at 19th. That other one was a space at 19th at the Bank Gallery at 11th in Baltimore, and it was the old. There was a Playboy Club up top, and it had been Continental Hotel or something, maybe.
Continental Hotel, yeah. With literally, there was. My first job in the bank, I got the head of the investment division took me to lunch at the Playboy Club regularly. It was only a 1 martini lunch, though.
And so we would pair an artist with an architect to design the space, although we had no money, so there wasn't any money to spend. But there were life safety issues or code issues, not life safety, but just code issues that we were trying to stay within code. And the next picture is Paragraph Gallery, which we still have today. That was a space that's in the Chamber Lofts building on 12th between Main and Walnut that we actually spent 25 grand on because we were getting a 5-year lease. It's in a low to moderate income building, and they had to rent it out to us for some reason. I forget why, but so we spent some money, and an architect really put some time with the artist curator Hesse McGraw. I think it was Brad Satterwhite from BNIM, and this is still a space that we have today.
And this is important in part because that you will see there are 2 cars and 1 person on this street in the middle of the day in downtown Kansas City, in what had been, when I was growing up, a pretty major and busy intersection.
So that picture, Crosby, we concentrated around 12th and Walnut, 12th and Main, and the idea was we had spaces that we would go into for a short time and then leave. Other spaces we had more permanently, and the idea was to try to create some critical mass and have some openings at the same time. And this is much later.
But the basic idea, it's so interesting. Art has always been related to entertainment and to parties and to the social gatherings. Artists themselves frequently work alone, but they love to show it at parties. And the interesting thing to me is that you became very quickly a model nationally. I know you consulted with people around the country when you were starting Charlotte Street, but you also almost instantly became a model. There was nothing quite like what you did in the rest of the country. A couple of places maybe, the creative.
Yeah, well, actually, for Urban Culture Project, funders, bless their hearts, wanted us to find models around the country, and we weren't really interested in that. We did get a little information from Tucson or somewhere and kind of packaged it up, set it off, and said, this is our model, when it wasn't. But we wanted to do what we wanted to do. And so I think overall, longer term, elements of what Charlotte Street's done have become models. Collectively, the group of projects, programs, activities that we have today is highly unusual and really has developed in a very organic way out of the people and artists and their expressed needs, desires, wants for, as well as staff's own opinions about things. But I think the model aspect perhaps doesn't apply overall, but to individual Urban Culture Project or the awards or our curator and residence program or the various elements, I think, are models.
Well, there's Richard Florida and his idea of latte land, the creative community, and all that being important for the development, particularly the redevelopment of downtowns. There's an obvious element of truth in that, but it also seems to me equally obvious that it can't be a top-down thing. It's got to be a bottom-up thing. It's got to be somebody like you having an idea and getting together with the sort of folks that hang out in Puchek's kitchen to really make it work. The Crossroads is organic. The Power and Light District, as much as we may have needed it, and some of us may like it or not like it.
Right.
It's not organic, and the Crossroads is. And therefore, it's the life of the city is much more in the Crossroads and in what you did downtown rather than what the Power and Light District does, which is fine. I'm not against it, but it may be necessary, in fact. But this is real life.
Yeah, and I think, again, people crave authenticity and community, and I just think it's really important that it's authentic, it's real, it's, and so we're just lucky I was lucky to have the people around me to guide. I had my ideas, but people were artists and curators and others. I was doing what they wanted me to do. So,
right.
In a lot of ways.
Right. And you talk and others talk both in the 10th anniversary thing and some other interviews that I've seen about the creative development aspect of this. The turning of older buildings and into contemporary spaces, and the notion that having an artist on your development board is a good idea. It's part. It's really actually the recreation, the reweaving of the fabric of the city.
Yeah, it's reuse of existing structures that's is finally happening here. We're late to most everything. It had been happening on the coast, not happening here. People come here and say, still can't believe how many older structures we've got that have not been, demolished.
We failed to tear them down.
It seems like we destroyed a lot, but you fast forward to today, and I mean, even today, you wish that that artists were pulled into. I mean, they weren't just art wasn't an add-on to a project, but artists are either on the board or on the project team from the very beginnings and helping to shape things. And we had a project called Art Through Architecture, which really didn't stick, but the idea was to not only just put art in architectural spaces, but to actually have the architects invite the artists in to at the very beginning. And some of the smaller firms, whether it's Helix or Eldorado or Chem, and have been doing that. Ideally, you'd love to see it at the large architectural firms so that artists really get worked into the basics.
You can see it to some extent here, but I think one of the things you've done very successfully is you've put a lot of different art forms, and you talk about frequently about being a visual arts supporter, but you music and performance art is very much a part, and as you say, architecture. You've really united all the arts, it seems to me, in what you do, and the spoken word is very important. Glen North is an example.
I mean, from the beginning, I think the interest was in a cross or multidisciplinary approach. More of the people I knew were visual artists, and we took on that bias for, I think, those reasons to begin with. But I have loved dance and music, and I was on a bunch of theater boards for a while. So we've tried to reach out. It's more difficult, I think, in the performing side sometimes when you've got groups of dancers or groups of of actors, and that's a little different than just an individual visual artist or an individual musician. But I think I know that Amy and the board and staff today is interested in fostering even more on the performance side. And I think a lot of the most interesting work happens at the intersection of any of this anyway. And so if you can get a dancer, a choreographer working with a visual artist, Jane's never done that, right? And that work at the intersections is really interesting.
We had a great example of it here a couple of nights ago. Warren Rosser, whose painting you can see, we're doing four artists that we're calling Charlotte Street artists who won Charlotte Street Awards seriatim over the year. And right now our first artist is Warren Rosser, who many of you will know, who's recently retired as head of the painting department at the Art Institute. But we brought Dwight Frizzell, a wonderful musician, and Tom Aber, who created a composition with very unique, sorry about that, unique instruments. To respond to Warren's painting and with an animation that was based on Warren's painting. It was really pretty spectacular, I thought.
Yeah, it really was.
And that's a good example of the kind of things that you've done at Charlotte Street.
Well, I think the city's been very siloed. I mean, racially, but within the arts community, in terms of discipline, visual art, music, theater, dance, it was, and the large organizations, have their fiefdoms, and they didn't cross. I think we were one of the first to actually pull people out of the Nelson to work with people from the Nerman, Grand Arts, et cetera, and put everybody together working on the arts community and on behalf of artists here. And so I think there's a lot more crossover from artists to large organization and cross disciplines, and I think that's all good.
And speaking of that and the kind of diversity that you represent, there's another kind of diversity, racial diversity, and that you at one point earlier on in Charlotte Street's history, you were challenged a little bit on that, but you have supported a number of African American and Hispanic artists. And
yeah, I mean, I would say that's in terms of diversity racially, that's been something that has not been as, we haven't been as successful at that over the years. And I know it's a big topic for Amy's staff and board, and they're actively working on that. We were certainly working on it, but I wouldn't hold it up, what we've done there, I wouldn't hold that up as a model. We were trying, but I don't think we succeeded very well.
Yeah, and so things still to work on, and so things to work on. you decided a couple of years ago that you were going to step back from Charlotte Street, and how does an organization that, it wasn't a one-man band, of course, because you created a community really around it, but you were the inspiration and fundraiser and the person who knew the folks in the civic community and whatnot. How do you sustain? You've gone through one management change after you step back. How do you sustain something like this?
Well, I mean, just to elaborate on, I wasn't a one-man band. I mean, and like I mentioned earlier, I'm no good at management. The staff we had and they have now is simply extraordinary, and all that past staff did and current staff is doing, it's, I think, unbelievable. So few people on staff and board have done so much. A lot of that comes from, I think, the collaborating, so that as we're working with different organizations, they will lend somebody to us and they're participating in it. But we collectively, I think, have created a community, but it's been an amazing merry band that's actually accomplished that, and I've been a spokesperson, but obviously it's many people. What was the question?
So I think you've answered, but let me ask.
Transition.
Transition, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I think what you fight in any not-for-profit, as people love what they do and care and have amazing passion, but is burnout. And there is just so much work, and it's never, I mean, in the corporate world, you've got a lot of money that covers up. Well, you don't necessarily have a lot of money, but I mean, there is more money. And that covers up a lot of issues and problems. In the not-for-profit world, you've got your passion and your belief in the mission. And the burnout is intense. And different times, I certainly felt it. The people who work with me felt it, and everybody in the community feels it. The artists, get no pay, get very little money, and they work incredibly hard. So it's pervasive. I think that I decided to step down for several reasons. There was some burnout. The fundraising is exhausting. But I also felt like founders, people who start things, stick around too long and need to give way to younger people, new ideas, new ways of doing things. So we started a process, and we actually started fairly early in a young organization's life to think about it and to try to develop some systems, although Amy may not agree that we did anything to get ready for it, but we did try, but there's always so much more to do.
And Amy, by the way, is Amy Kligman. Amy, where are you? You're back. She's back in the back. She's taken over as the director of Charlotte Street. So she is the future of Charlotte Street. There's a great phrase that an artist I think you supported, Alan Winkler, has. That's I think in the 10th anniversary book, that he says Charlotte Street is all about. And it's a variation of what you've just said, I think. He said it's the joy of small lives lived well. I mean, so much in Kansas City these days, and some of it's great. The Kauffman Center, it's great that we have that. There are a lot of people who love the streetcar. There are a lot of big things going on in Kansas City. But the great thing about Charlotte Street, the organic part of it, the community creation part of it, the public space part of it, is that it has the right size. It's a human size. It's a street life size. It's a one space sized endeavor. It's an individual artist powered endeavor.
Yeah. Well, I think the power of individuals is one of the premises behind Charlotte Street. That an individual artist can make a huge difference. An individual curator or dancer or and I really believe in that. And when those individuals start coming together, just watch out. It's amazing what what can happen. And I think that's so much more important, or as important, I would say, if not more. I mean, the Nelson, the Performing Arts Center, it's all great, but it's nothing without the arts community. And the arts community, frankly, is so much, I mean, the artists and arts professionals themselves, I think, are so much, lead the way. And that's what you want. We're just lucky to have that in town. A lot of cities don't have it.
Well, I completely agree with you. I think we're really lucky to have you who've recognized that in such an imaginative, creative way. So what are you going to do with your life now that you're semi-retired? Just flip from Biennale to Biennale, or what's in store for David now?
I'm working, as friends know, on being highly undependable. So, not to friends, but I mean in terms of being on boards or things. And I don't want to do that. I've got a few ideas for some projects, and I'd love to find a way to continue to help. I'm still helping Charlotte Street when they want it and need it in a small way. But it's nice to spend time with friends and yeah, seeing art. I went to a dance Biennale in Lyon, France, in the fall, and I just sent out an email wondering who's going to. Chris Eriksums at the Spencer Museum, curator, was suggesting going to the Biennale in Nepal. I'm not going to do that, but it's just fun to think about some of that.
If you do, we would like to read your tweets, please. Well, you've done a spectacular thing for the city, David, and I think we can all be grateful for that. So I want to open this up to questions, but would everybody give David and Charlotte Street a round of applause?
Thank you.
So questions, commentary? Sir.
If you want to take a walking tour, all this activity is, you mentioned 54th and Locust, where would you end up at?
No, that house, the 54th in Charlotte, was a house where this artist lived.
It's been torn down long ago.
No, it's still there, I think.
It is? I
think so.
I live right down the street.
But I don't know who, but,
I thought it was condemned, actually, at one point. No? No?
well,
Okay.
probably many times, no. You could get in touch with Amy Kligman and get on an email blast, I think, and for openings and activities, talks.
One of the real points about Charlotte Street is it's not in one place, it's in many places, and it happens as it happens originally around downtown, but now out, and Crossroads, but outside of that now too.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, there are certain spaces, 3 or 4 spaces and studio spaces, mostly downtown, but then there are artist projects that are happening in the region, in the greater city region.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you.
There are so many things that have happened in the city with your assistance. You're one of the reasons that I stayed. And I think that Charlotte Street is one of the reasons people stay in the city and are able to produce. So thank you for your energy towards us.
Well, thank you, Peregrine.
Yes, ma'am.
What are the boundaries of downtown? Because from Independence, 18th Street looks pretty and uptown.
Well, technically, 18th Street is in the Crossroads area, which used to be the light industrial district, and depending on what year you're talking about, when the loop was created, the downtown loop was created in the 50s, essentially. Not 435, the downtown loop, this much smaller, which is at Truman Road. There are Truman Roads on either side of it, of the southern end of the loop. And the inside the loop is what we think of as downtown today. So 70, 35, and the conjunction of all that is really downtown.
I think the definition of downtown, I mean, from a civic standpoint, I think it's actually expanded beyond that within the loop, as you say, so that the central city.
I call 36 and Broadway Midtown.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, technically, you know, if you're the downtown council, you think downtown goes to 31st Street. But when people talk about downtown, they're typically talking about inside the loop, and the Crossroads is a separate district, and then Union Hill is a separate, Hospital Hill, et cetera. But it's all a little fungible, you know. Sure.
A lot of us have become really concerned about the fragmentation, divisiveness, and anger that has become nationwide. Could you talk a little bit about how the arts community and your type of projects can help bring people together and perhaps to a greater understanding of each other through the arts?
I think what I was trying to do at the time with Charlotte Street was let the artists be the artists, and without an agenda, if you will, in terms of just letting each artist do what they, you know, what their practice is, and let them do what they do. So we weren't, you know, I think when you look at something like Alvin Ailey, Kansas City Friends of Alvin Ailey, I think they've done a great job, both with an art objective and a social purpose of bringing people together, if you will, in an amazing way, and particularly with regard to racial issues and overtures. I think what Charlotte Street has done is to build community out of this. It hasn't been top down, but it's been bottom up, if you will, allowing people to come together and meet, if you're open to that. And so that I think, you know, it's gotten to a crazy point in terms of First Fridays where it's a little bit of a zoo, but if you take the time to meet people, I think people are really open and they want to share over a glass of wine, talking about art or just anything that you're talking about. So I think that's, I'm not aware of any other kinds of gatherings where it's so real. And if you extend yourself and meet people in that way. But it's not a top-down kind of thing, if you understand what I mean. It's organic and bottom-up. Does that begin to address some of that?
Sure.
I'd like to share a Charlotte Street story. And you were talking about how it's not the big organizations and it's more on the street level. Last summer, there was a group from Scandinavia, and it was a violinist and a dancer and a guy who recorded some Kansas Cityans telling stories and taking photographs. And he was displaying the photographs down in Liaskina. We haven't mentioned Liaskina yet, but it's on the west side. And it was really hot that night, so they had the garage doors open on both sides of the building. And it was still hot in there. And the dancer was working really hard for over an hour. She was a sweaty mess, and then here came one of those great Kansas City storms. You could see the lightning off in the distance. And then it hit, and the wind blew through Liaskina, and the violinist's music all went clean across the gallery out the other door, and the rain started falling, and the dancer just stopped. And she turned towards the door, and she walked right out into the street on the north side of Liaskina, drenched, and these little kids got up and followed her.
Perfect.
That sounds like fun. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to thank you. My daughter was a recipient of some studio space for a couple of years, and we supported her, and she talks about the community in Kansas City, and she said the arts community is really a small community, and she got to know everybody, you know, after being on the East Coast, coming back to Kansas City. And now she's in Chicago, and there's a community from Charlotte Street that's up there.
What's her name?
Elizabeth Allen Cannon. Oh, she was like, that's awesome. Yeah. So I just, you know, and that's the perfect example of people who, you know, I don't know them, but they know my daughter, and you were part of that, and you were very supportive of her, and it makes a difference. And
Yeah, I think it makes a huge difference. And, even though she's in Chicago, I think it's amazing in terms of how people who are not here, artists, are still circling here. And friends in New York or London or San Francisco or wherever, and it's part of it's the technology of today. But there is something about also the Kansas City artist community, and I don't know what it is, but I hear from countless people who talk about, some have moved away, and they say, I can't recreate what I had there, and maybe I didn't know I was so lucky and I was part of it, and then they go someplace else and they don't have it. It's probably everywhere, but I do think there's something unusual in the water here, and it's the people, and there is an intense sense of community, I think.
Exactly. Sir, again.
You talked about fragmented. Could you do something between 39 and 40th on Main where that godforsaken cat store is? And across the street, they put plaques in the sidewalks and whatnot, and I'll be damned if there's not 4 payday loans.
Right.
Yeah, well, stuff's bubbling around there because, there is something there called the drugstore, and a group of artists have gone in.
I know that, yeah, but you can't see it. That doesn't make any street appearance to me.
Yeah.
It was packed Saturday night.
Yeah,
It was
it's.
about
It
1,000
was
people.
packed, but still, it's ungodly looking from the street.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
So, we'll work on that. Yes, ma'am.
It's really fun to reflect on the past and the last 20 years and to see, what's been nurtured and how far we've come, but I would love to know what you think about the future, and particularly where you might see the next David Hughes, and where are the entrepreneurs of the next 20 years being nurtured?
Yeah, I don't predict the future, and I try to stay out of Charlotte Street's, ideas about the future, because I think, you're on the board, you're on the board, and I think new people moving to town as you have, and Amy and new staff. I'm really excited about the possibilities and new ideas, but I continue to believe that, we've scratched the surface. There's just you could blow it apart. So what's happened is amazing, I think, but it's just the surface. And if you really funded, Charlotte Street is funding artists, and there's lots of activity. But if you had more money going at this thing, and it's not all about money, but you could do a lot of things. I just think the snowball would continue, and if you redirected, 0.5% of the money that's going to the large arts organizations down to the grassroots, and got it to artists, I think the sky's the limit. But John O'Brien jokes about him having picked me up off the street and helped me along in terms of, and he helped educate me as others, lots of others did, and you don't know where that's going to come from. And I think people, what I was always struck by, and I wasn't always good at this myself, but in looking at Amy or somebody like Rachel Smith at the Art Space, or Mo or Margaret, Kate Hackman who worked with me, all these people. You talk about your daughter as an intern with Peregrine, the amount of time and care that individuals take mentoring and bringing young artists and others along, you just don't know where that goes. And so you just kind of hope it pops up. The only word of caution, I think, on any of this is that it is be careful what you wish for, because I think we've grown, but there are a lot more people involved, which is generally a good idea, but there are a lot more people who think they know what artists want, and they don't. So I'm not, there's more awareness. I'm not sure there's more understanding of any of this, because people tend not to listen to the artists, even today. That's not surprising. It's just, and something like the mayor's idea for an arts festival, I don't know much about it, but I'm if that were coming from an artist or arts professional versus the business or political people, I'd be a lot more interested in it. And I think that's something to be careful of what you wish for. I mean, I think we fight mediocrity in this town, and things have gotten, there is a higher bar among some number of organizations and people, but we still fight the mediocrity. And the idea of an arts fair, just to have an arts fair, I don't know, coming from the business and political side.
It's not organic in any way, shape, or form. It's the idea for the world's longest table. But what are you going to put on the table? Yes, ma'am.
I was just going to ask, I don't really know where the money comes from for Charlotte Street, and if you can talk a little bit about that. Is it all private donations? If you can touch on, is there any involvement with the National Endowment for the Arts, and is there any concern for where that might be going with the current administration and their view of the arts?
They're private donations, individuals, foundations, corporations. Charlotte Street, Amy they got their first NEA grant, small one recently. I was never didn't have the patience to do that. It also takes a long planning horizon, and we didn't have that. Where that's going, who knows? But yeah, Charlotte Street raises money. It's all local. Well, actually, it's not. Actually, Charlotte Street probably gets a higher percentage of its money from places like Pollock Krasner Foundation in New York, Andy Warhol Foundation. We're getting money from the Ford Foundation, which that kind of national money coming to Kansas City is very unusual to begin with, and it's highly unusual to be going to a small arts organization. So we felt proud, and for the artists and the organization representing Kansas City in that way nationally. But by far most of the money comes locally, and you're trying to make a case for artists. And I think that's one of the things that we did well over the 20 years was educating the philanthropic community about artists, so that there is now money coming, not enough, but money coming from the large foundations to smaller organizations that support different kinds of artists. But
David's very modest about this, but Charlotte Street has a national reputation as having pioneered doing something, not just giving money to artists, that's easy to do, but in creating a community of around artists and artists' work and artists in the community. So hence Ford Foundation and others. Todd?
I just want to say that Margaret Silva was the greatest influence for me. She brought in world art that are in museums all over the world, including Roxy painting and so many others. I mean, I was an early collector. I have over 1,000 pieces from the Crossroads art district, still bought by the staff. And my ex-wife was the philanthropist. She gave the date. I never wrote a check to Terry Kelly. She's the one that put us on the map globally. Because what artists do is they speak to future generations of what it was like to live now. And that's what art does. It speaks to future generations. Thank you, David. What a good story.
Well, Grand Arts really put Kansas City on the map globally. International artists knew Grand Arts better than they knew the Nelson. And I think what Grand Arts did for the local arts community, doing things for the international or national artists, but what they did for the local community by exposing all the artists and hangers-on like me to that work was huge over 1995 until just recently. There's a new book that Grand Arts has put out that I don't know where can they get that?
We'll make sure we have it in the library.
Yeah.
I've got a few.
Okay.
So if there are no more questions, then once again, let's thank David Hughes and thank all the folks who work at Charlotte Street.
Thank you all.